You ever get that feeling where your stomach drops for no reason, like life just leaned in close and whispered, brace yourself? Not fear, not panic, something quieter, colder. That feeling dragged me onto a plane without warning. I didn't get a sign, no phone call in the middle of the night, no dramatic message that screamed emergency. Just that sudden, suffocating weight under my ribs, like my body had already read a chapter of my life my mind hadn't caught up to yet. The airport was loud like it always is, wheels rattling across tile floors, intercoms barking gate numbers, the sharp bite of burnt coffee hanging in the air. Everywhere I looked, people were hugging like it was a movie reunion scene. Mothers crying happy tears, fathers filming shaky videos they'd never rewatch, kids sprinting between legs, laughing like the world had never hurt them. That should have been me. I should have been excited, nervous in a good way. Counting down the minutes, checking my boarding pass, imagining the reunion. But I felt nothing. No joy, no anticipation. Just this heavy, icy knot twisting deeper and deeper inside me, like something was already wrong, and my body knew it long before my brain was ready to admit it. I'm not reckless, I'm not impulsive. I plan everything. My grocery runs, my doctor visits, my holidays. My whole damn life is built on calendars and reminders. I like knowing what's coming next. But that morning, I woke up before my alarm, staring at the ceiling in the quiet dark, and the words just slipped out of my mouth without permission. Something's not right. I didn't argue with it, didn't try to reason it away. Within an hour, I was dressed. Within two, I was ordering the first ticket south I could find. No warning calls, no explanations, no asking permission from anyone, not even myself. It felt like stepping off a cliff and trusting the ground would appear. In my tote bag, tucked carefully like it mattered, 2 jars of homemade elderberry preserves, dark, tart. The kind my son Sterling used to beg for when he was sick back in Chicago. Every winter, when his throat hurt or his chest rattled, I'd pull those jars from the cupboard and spoon the syrup into warm tea. He'd wrinkle his nose and drink it anyway. Works every time, Ma, he used to say. Next to the jars sat a plush teddy bear. Yeah, I know how that sounds. My daughter-in-law Vada wasn't pregnant. There was no baby announcement. No milestone to celebrate, but the last time we spoke, her voice sounded thin, cracked, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well, trying not to echo. She kept saying she was tired. Kept saying everything was fine. People don't sound like that when things are fine. I didn't know what else to bring. I just wanted something warm, something soft, something that said, you're not alone, even if I didn't know how to say it out loud. I kept calling Sterling, once, twice, 10 times, straight to voicemail. I told myself he was busy, working late, sleeping, anything reasonable. 3 days in a row, no call back. Vada, silent for over a week. That's when the quiet got loud. People like to joke about a mother's intuition. They call it superstition. Old wives' tales, something cute you put on a greeting card with flowers and cursive fonts. But let me tell you something. That morning I learned it's more like a smoke alarm, and mine wasn't chirping, it was screaming. I paid for that condo, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, every closing document, every wire transfer, every signature with my name etched into the margin. I bought it for them 3 years earlier, right after the wedding. A fresh start, they called it, a place where love could grow without stress breathing down their necks. I wanted them safe. Comfortable, protected. I truly believed money could act like armor, that if the walls were solid enough, happiness would stay inside. The second I stepped into that building, I knew how wrong I was. The place looked perfect from the outside. Historic brick polished by time, a quiet courtyard with trimmed hedges and stone benches no one ever sat on, the kind of building people brag about living in. Quiet wealth, clean lines, respectable neighbors. But beauty has a way of lying. The elevator ride felt too long, each floor number lighting up like a countdown. My chest tightened with every passing second, like my body was already preparing for something my mind still refused to name. When I reached their floor, the hallway lights hummed softly. No music, no laughter, no life leaking through the walls like it used to when I visited. And then I saw the door, not closed, not wide open, just cracked barely an inch. Like someone had left in a hurry or left because they no longer cared. I stood there longer than I should have, my hand hovering inches from the handle. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, to call the police. To call anyone but myself, but mothers don't get that luxury. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, not food, not home. Stale cigarette smoke clung to the air, heavy and sour. Old alcohol layered underneath it, the kind that lingers after too many nights of pretending things are fine. And something else, something sharp and rotten, like regret that had been sitting too long with nowhere to go. Sterling swore he quit smoking. It's bad for you, Ma, he'd said with that crooked grin. Funny how lies always have a smell. Boots were scattered in the hallway, one standing upright like it had been kicked off in exhaustion. The other slammed against the wall, scuffing the cream-colored paint I had personally chosen, a careless mark where effort had stopped mattering. I stepped further inside, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the neighbors could hear it. The kitchen looked like chaos had moved in and signed a long-term lease. Unwashed dishes stacked in the sink, crusted and gray. Half-eaten pizza boxes collapsed on the counter, dried cheese clinging to cardboard like it had given up days ago. Empty cognac bottles lined the edge of the counter, expensive ones. Celebration drinks, not survival drinks, except there had been nothing to celebrate. The table caught my eye next. Right at the edge, neatly stacked like they were waiting for someone brave enough to look, unopened envelopes. Utilities, medical statements, final notices, the kind of mail people avoid until avoidance becomes habit. But what froze me in place wasn't the mess. It wasn't the bottles, it wasn't the bills. It was a small white box sitting quietly beside the envelopes. Heart medication, blood pressure stabilizers prescribed to Vada 6 months earlier. The seal was still intact. Dust coated the edges like time itself had given up checking on it, untouched. That box screamed louder than anything else in that apartment, because you don't ignore medication like that unless you've stopped believing it will help or you've stopped believing you matter. I moved through the apartment slowly now, like I was trespassing on a crime scene. The bedroom was worse, sheets tangled and unwashed, one pillow missing its case, closet doors half open, clothes shoved aside like someone had been searching for something and never found it. The bathroom mirror was streaked, empty pill bottles rattled in the trash, no makeup, no hairbrush, no sign of the woman who once insisted on folding towels a certain way because it feels calmer. Calm had left this place a long time ago. I stood there, surrounded by everything I paid for, everything I tried to protect, and realized something brutal. This apartment wasn't just neglected. It was abandoned emotionally long before it was ever left physically. And whatever happened here, it didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, while nobody was paying attention. "Who are you looking for?" The voice came from behind me, soft but sharp enough to cut straight through my chest. I spun around so fast my heart stuttered. For a split second, I thought I might pass out right there on the kitchen floor. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, not inside the apartment, just hovering at the threshold like she knew better than to step fully into whatever rot lived there now. She wore a faded floral housecoat and slippers worn thin at the heel. Her gray hair was pulled back tight, as if she'd learned long ago that neatness was the last thing a person could still control. Her eyes didn't flick around in curiosity. They were already heavy, weighted with pity she didn't bother hiding. I'm looking for Sterling," I said, my voice thinner than I expected. "I'm his mother." Something passed over her face, recognition mixed with resignation. Like a doctor who already knows the diagnosis and hates having to say it out loud, she sighed, not a sharp sigh, not impatient, the kind people use when they've seen the end of the story before the main character arrives. "Oh, honey," she said softly, shaking her head. "I don't know where your boy is." My throat closed. "What do you mean?" I asked. She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms like she was bracing herself. "He's been out running the streets, I guess. Music blasting in here for days, loud enough to rattle my cabinets, then nothing. Nothing." She paused, her gaze drifting past me into the apartment like she was replaying something she wished she could forget. "But your girl," she continued, lowering her voice. "The ambulance took her." The room tilted. Every sound dropped out at once, like someone pulled the plug on reality. I felt my knees weaken, my hands grip the counter without remembering when I moved them. "The ambulance?" I whispered. She nodded slowly. 2, maybe 3 days ago now. The words landed wrong, like they didn't belong in the same sentence. "They carried her out unconscious," the woman went on. So thin I barely recognized her anymore, like a shadow of herself. Didn't look like she'd been eating. Didn't look like anyone had been checking on her either. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sand. "Did Sterling come back?" I asked. The woman shook her head. "Not that I saw. Door's been open ever since. I figured someone would return." No one did. My ears rang. The walls felt too close. I couldn't tell if I was breathing or just remembering how. I don't remember thanking her. I don't remember what I said next. I don't even remember walking out of the apartment. I only remember standing on the sidewalk outside, the sun too bright, the air too normal for what I had just heard. People passed by laughing. Cars honked. Life kept moving, completely uninterested in the fact that mine had just cracked open. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my bag. City General Hospital. I called once, busy again, ringing. Finally, a voice answered, calm, professional, detached. "Yes, we have a patient by that name," the nurse said. She was brought in unresponsive, severe dehydration, blood pressure dangerously low. "She's stable for now." For now. I slid down onto the curb, my legs refusing to hold me any longer. The tote bag tipped over beside me, one jar of elderberry preserves rolling gently against my shoe. And in that moment, one thought beat in my head like a war drum. If my daughter-in-law was fighting for her life and my son was alive, then someone was going to answer for how it got this far, because accidents happen. Neglect is a choice, and this didn't feel like an accident at all. Hospitals have a sound. It's not just the beeping machines or the rolling carts or the overhead announcements that blur together after a while. It's deeper than that, a low, constant hum of urgency, of fear being managed, of time slipping through fingers while professionals pretend it isn't. And once you hear that sound on the worst day of your life, once it becomes the background noise to your personal hell, you never forget it. City General smelled like bleach and fear, the kind of clean that doesn't comfort you, the kind that scrubs away hope as efficiently as it does blood. The air felt sharp in my lungs, like it didn't belong to people who were already struggling to breathe. The emergency room was pure chaos, people shouting names, someone crying loudly without shame, nurses moving fast, voices clipped and efficient, hands always busy. Phones rang nonstop. Stretchers rolled past like conveyor belts of pain. Everyone was fighting for something: attention, air, time. I didn't wait my turn. I didn't stand politely behind a line or clear my throat to be noticed. I pushed through. "I'm looking for Vada Jefferson," I said, my voice louder than it had any right to be, loud enough that conversations paused and a few heads turned. "She was brought in by ambulance. ICU." A nurse behind the desk looked up sharply. "Ma'am, only immediate family." "I am family," I snapped, cutting her off mid-sentence. I don't know what she saw on my face in that moment. Maybe it was the fear, maybe it was the anger. Maybe it was the look of someone who was already done asking for permission. Whatever it was, it shut the conversation down. She hesitated, then reached for the phone, lowered her voice, whispered into the receiver while glancing at a screen. Her posture shifted as she listened, shoulders straightening, expression changing. Then she looked back at me. "Yes," she said quietly, "she's here," 3 words, and suddenly the room felt smaller. "She's in the ICU." Those 3 letters hit harder than a punch to the chest. ICU, not recovery, not observation, intensive. The walk there felt unreal, like I'd stepped out of my body and left someone else to move my legs. The deeper we went into the hospital, the quieter it got. No shouting, no chaos, just the steady rhythm of machines doing the work bodies couldn't, breathing for people, keeping time for hearts that forgot how. A nurse stopped me outside a glass door. "She's critical," she said gently, like tone alone could soften the word. "I need to see her." She studied my face for a long moment, really looked at me. The fear, the resolve. The way my hands were clenched so tightly my knuckles had gone white. "I'll get the doctor," she said, finally nodding, and that's when it hit me. Nobody had been asking for Vada, no husband pacing the hallway. No frantic phone calls demanding updates. No next of kin arguing with staff. No one. If I hadn't listened to that feeling, that quiet, terrifying warning, she would have been lying behind that glass door completely alone. She might have died without a single familiar face in the room. The thought nearly brought me to my knees. I pressed my palm against the cool hospital wall, forcing myself to stay upright, forcing air into my lungs. Because whatever was happening on the other side of that door, I was here now, and I wasn't leaving. "You the mother?" The doctor stepped out of the ICU door slowly, like he was already carrying the weight of what he was about to say. He was tall, shoulders slumped from exhaustion, his white coat creased and worn like armor that had taken too many hits. He pulled off his glasses and rubbed his face, dragging his hands down slowly, the way people do when they already know a conversation is about to ruin someone's life. "Mother-in-law," I corrected. "What's wrong with her?" I didn't ask how she was. I didn't ask if she'd be okay. Some part of me already knew better. He didn't soften his voice, didn't circle the truth or wrap it in comforting language. "Advanced bilateral pneumonia," he said plainly. The words sounded clinical, cold, almost harmless if you didn't know what they meant, and that's not even the worst part. My chest tightened. "What's worse?" I asked, though every instinct in my body screamed not to. He glanced down at the clipboard in his hands, then back at me. "She's severely dehydrated, malnourished. Her electrolytes were dangerously low when she came in." He paused, not for drama, but because even doctors need a breath before delivering certain facts. Her body temperature was over 104 degrees. That kind of fever doesn't happen overnight. It means she was sick for days, possibly longer. Days. She hadn't been eating properly, he continued. "Based on her labs and physical condition, we estimate at least 2 weeks of inadequate nutrition. 2 weeks." The hallway felt like it was tilting. I had to lean against the wall to stay upright. "No food," I whispered. "Very little," he said, "and almost no fluids." I stared at him, waiting for the part where he explained how this could happen by accident. Waiting for the reassurance that someone had tried. It never came. "She was alone," he said quietly. "No consistent fluids, no medication, no medical attention, no follow-up care. Alone. If the neighbors hadn't heard her collapse and called 911, he added, his voice steady but heavy, she would have died. Dead. That word didn't just land, it echoed. Bounced around my skull like it was looking for somewhere to settle and couldn't. I felt sick. She was prescribed heart and blood pressure medication, he continued. None of it was in her system. My mind flashed to the dusty, unopened box on the kitchen table. The seal still intact, forgotten, ignored, neglected. Do you know why she didn't take it? I asked. He shook his head. We see this sometimes when people are depressed, when they're isolated, when they stop believing help will help, depressed. Isolated, those words burned. Where was her husband? I asked. The doctor hesitated just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. We haven't been able to reach him, he said carefully. No emergency contact responded. No one checked in, my hands curled into fists. Can I see her? I asked. She's in a medically induced coma, he said. On a ventilator, her lungs need rest, her body needs time. I nodded because if I didn't, I would have screamed right there in that hallway. I would have shattered into pieces no one had time to sweep up. She's stable for now, he added, but she's not out of danger. For now, those words are cruel. They give hope with one hand and take it back with the other. I swallowed hard. She didn't deserve this. The doctor looked at me, really looked, and his voice softened for the first time. No, he said quietly, she didn't. He gave a small nod. We'll do everything we can. And then he turned and walked away, already being pulled toward the next crisis, the next family, the next life hanging in the balance. I stayed there, staring at the ICU doors. Because what he didn't say out loud was screaming in my head. This wasn't just illness. This was abandonment. This was what happens when someone is left behind while the world keeps moving. Nothing prepares you for the moment someone you love stops looking like themselves and starts looking like a medical project. No warning, no adjustment period. One second they're a person with habits and laughter and opinions, and the next they're surrounded by machines that decide whether they breathe, blink, or stay alive. The nurse opened the ICU door and stepped aside, and I walked into a room that felt colder than it should have been. Vada lay in the bed, swallowed by white sheets and plastic tubing. The machines around her blinked and hummed with indifferent precision, each one monitoring a different part of her body like tiny judges deciding her fate in silence. She didn't look asleep. She looked absent. Her face was too sharp, cheekbones cutting through skin that looked stretched thin and dull. Her lips were dry and cracked. Her eyelashes rested against her cheeks, unmoving, as if even blinking had become too much effort. Her hands were the worst. I remembered those hands folding laundry, tapping impatiently on the kitchen counter, waving animatedly when she talked. Now they lay limp at her sides, pale and fragile, fingers slightly curled like they'd forgotten what they were supposed to do. She'd always been small, petite, people liked to say, but this wasn't small, this was disappearance. This was what happens when the body burns through everything it has just to survive and no one notices. I stepped closer, my legs shaking. Each beep from the monitors felt too loud, too final. I was terrified that if I breathed wrong, something would change. I reached for her hand. It was hot, not warm, hot, fever heat. The kind that makes your skin feel unreal, like it doesn't belong to a living person. I wanted to scream her name, to shake her shoulders, to demand she wake up and tell me what happened. But instead, I leaned down and whispered, my voice breaking before I could stop it. I'm here, baby. You're not alone anymore. The words barely made it past my throat, but I said them anyway. Because if there was any part of her still listening, I wanted it to hear that. I stayed there, holding her hand, memorizing her face in case I never saw it like this again or ever saw it at all. And that's when the anger finally arrived. Not loud, not explosive, cold, the kind of anger that doesn't shout, it sharpens. Where was my son, the man who stood at the altar and promised in sickness and in health, the man who lived in the condo I paid for, the man whose phone I had been calling for days while his wife lay dying? I looked at Vada again, at the tubes, the wires, the ventilator breathing for her, and something inside me settled into place. This didn't happen overnight. This wasn't a sudden illness. This was neglect. This was what happens when someone decides, consciously or not, that another human being is not worth the effort of care. I gently placed her hand back on the bed and stepped away because the room was closing in on me. My chest felt tight, like there wasn't enough air in the world. I walked out of the ICU, my vision blurring, my heart pounding so hard it hurt, and then I saw him, at the end of the hallway, leaning against the wall, alive, unharmed. Whole, my son, and in that moment I knew this story wasn't about survival anymore. It was about accountability. Have you ever seen something so wrong that your mind refuses to process it at first, not because it's confusing, but because accepting it would shatter something you've spent your whole life believing? That was me standing on the hospital steps trying to breathe. I had to get out of the building. The ICU air felt too sterile, too heavy, like it was pressing down on my lungs. So I stepped outside just for a minute, telling myself I needed fresh air before I fell apart completely. The evening air was thick and warm, buzzing with city noise. Traffic snarled at the intersection. Horns blared. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed too loudly. People rushed past me with grocery bags, headphones in, arguing on phones, living their ordinary lives like nothing in the world was wrong. Behind me, just a few walls away, my daughter-in-law was fighting for every breath. Machines were breathing for her, monitoring her heart, keeping her alive, and out here, life didn't care. I stood at the edge of the steps, gripping the metal railing, trying to steady myself. My hands were still trembling. My chest felt tight, like the anger and fear inside me were competing for space. That's when I heard it, bass low at first. Distant, a dull vibration that didn't belong near a hospital, then louder, obnoxious, aggressive, the kind of music that rattles windows and announces itself like a warning. I don't care about anybody else. My stomach clenched. Tires screeched as a vehicle whipped around the corner too fast, engine roaring like it had something to prove. A massive midnight blue SUV came flying down the street, glossy, spotless, reflecting the streetlights like it had just rolled out of a showroom. I knew that car, every inch of it, because I bought it, not helped by, not co-signed, bought for the family, Sterling had said, for future kids, for safety. The windows were down. Music blasted so loud it vibrated through my bones. Laughter spilled out into the street, careless and drunk on freedom. And then I saw him, behind the wheel, my son, alive, healthy, whole. His head was thrown back in laughter, mouth wide, eyes bright. One hand gripped the steering wheel, the other waved casually out the window like he was in a parade, like the world existed purely for his enjoyment. For half a second, my brain refused to connect the dots. It told me I was mistaken, that it couldn't be him, that this was some cruel coincidence, because the man driving that car looked like life was sweet. And the man I had been calling for days, the man whose wife lay unconscious in intensive care, should not have been smiling like that. The SUV slowed just enough for me to see him clearly, not worried, not stressed, not broken. Thriving, I felt my body go strangely numb, like my nervous system had pulled the plug to protect me from overload. Sounds dulled, time stretched thin. The car rolled past me, bass thumping, laughter echoing off the hospital walls. And my son never looked at the building, didn't glance up at the windows, didn't hesitate, didn't slow down. He drove past the hospital where his wife was fighting to stay alive and disappeared into traffic. For several seconds, I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't think. Because if I allowed myself to understand what I had just seen, truly understand it, something inside me would break beyond repair. That was the moment my brain finally caught up, and nothing felt real anymore. He didn't look sick. He didn't look scared. He didn't look like a man whose wife was lying unconscious in an ICU bed with machines breathing for her. He looked like the king of the damn world. Sterling's head was thrown back in laughter, mouth wide, teeth flashing under the streetlights. His shoulders were relaxed, his posture loose. The kind of body language people have when nothing in their life is going wrong, like he didn't have a care on earth. The SUV rolled by slowly enough for the picture to burn itself into my mind. One hand was on the steering wheel. The other waved lazily out the window, keeping time with the music like he was leading the celebration. And then I saw them, two young women in the car with him, not nurses, not coworkers, not family. Not anyone who belonged anywhere near a hospital. Girls hanging halfway out the windows, hair flying, screaming over the music, laughing too loud, faces flushed, living like it was spring break and tomorrow didn't exist. One of them slapped the roof of the car, yelling something I couldn't hear over the bass. The other leaned across Sterling, shouting directions toward downtown nightlife. Club music pounded the street, heavy bass, fast rhythm, the kind meant to drown out thought and responsibility. This wasn't a detour, this wasn't stress relief. This was a party. My son didn't even glance at the hospital, didn't look at the building that held his wife's body together with machines and hope. Didn't slow down as he passed the entrance where ambulances came and went, didn't hesitate for a single second. He sped past the place where his wife was fighting for her life and disappeared toward bars, neon lights, and people who didn't know or care that someone was dying. I stood there rooted to the pavement, watching the taillights fade. I expected to feel something dramatic, rage, hysteria, collapse, but none of that came. Instead, something inside me went quiet, not peaceful, empty, cold. Like a switch had flipped and cut the power to whatever part of me still believed this was fixable. I realized then that this wasn't a mistake, not a misunderstanding, not a bad moment in an otherwise decent life. This was a choice. Over and over again, while Vada lay alone, unable to advocate for herself, unable to even lift her head, Sterling was choosing himself, choosing pleasure, choosing freedom, choosing not to look back. I thought about the unopened bills on the table, the dusty medication, the door left cracked like no one planned to return. Suddenly, it all made sense. Neglect isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself. It happens while someone else is busy having fun. I pressed my lips together, tasting something bitter at the back of my throat. My hands were steady now, my breathing calm. That terrified me more than if I had been shaking. Because when anger gets quiet, it stops asking for explanations. It starts preparing. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of what I was about to learn. It was just the part where denial finally died. My phone buzzed in my pocket the second his taillights disappeared. I felt it before I heard it, that sharp vibration against my hip, sudden and insistent, like the universe twisting the knife just to make sure I was paying attention. I didn't want to look, something in me already knew, but my hand moved anyway, slow and deliberate, like I was opening a letter I couldn't unread. I pulled the phone out and stared at the screen, the hospital lights reflecting off the glass. Sterling's name, the first message in 3 days. I opened it. Hey Ma, can't talk. I'm at the hospital with Vada. It's really bad. Haven't left her side. Pray for us. I read it once, then again and again. Each time the words felt less real, like they were written by someone who had no idea how close I was to the truth, or how badly this lie had misjudged me, because he had just driven past me, laughing, partying. Alive in every way that mattered. I could still hear the bass in my chest, still see the grin on his face, still picture the girls screaming out the windows like nothing in the world could touch them. And here he was standing nowhere near that ICU, telling me he hadn't left her side. The lie was so casual, so effortless, typed with the confidence of someone who truly believed he'd never be questioned. I waited for tears. They didn't come. Whatever part of me used to cry for my son burned off in that moment, evaporated by something hotter and far more dangerous. Clarity, clean, sharp, unforgiving. I understood then that this wasn't immaturity. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a man overwhelmed by pressure and making bad decisions. This was entitlement. Sterling genuinely believed he could live any life he wanted, reckless, selfish, consequence-free, and I would always be there to absorb the damage. To pay the bills, to clean the mess, to explain it away. I had raised him to believe in safety nets. I hadn't realized I'd become one. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my bag, not in anger, not shaking, calm, precise. I didn't text back, I didn't confront him in the street, didn't scream his name, didn't chase after the car, because I wasn't going back to beg. I wasn't going back to cry. I was going back to make decisions. I turned and walked toward the hospital doors, each step grounding me further in something solid and terrifying. The glass reflected my face back at me, older than I remembered, eyes clearer than they'd ever been. Behind those doors was a woman who had been abandoned, and ahead of me was a truth I could no longer avoid. The boy I raised, he didn't exist anymore. In his place stood a man who had made his choices, and choices have consequences. People think rage is loud. They picture shouting, breaking things, slamming doors, veins popping, words flying like knives. They're wrong. Real rage is quiet. Real rage is controlled, measured, terrifyingly focused. I walked back into the hospital like nothing had happened. No tears streaming down my face. No wild eyes. No shaking hands that might draw attention. If anyone looked at me, they would have seen an older woman moving with purpose, tired maybe, but composed. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the lobby was calm, too calm. A vending machine hummed to itself in the corner, offering snacks no one should be eating in a place like this. A receptionist tapped steadily on a keyboard, her nails clicking in a rhythm that suggested this was just another shift, another ordinary day. People sat scattered across plastic chairs, scrolling their phones, sipping coffee, waiting for news that hadn't come yet or news they were afraid would. The world hadn't stopped, only mine had. I walked up to the water fountain and poured myself a small paper cup. The water was cool, bland, unremarkable. I drank it slowly, deliberately. My voice didn't shake when I thanked the volunteer nearby. My hands didn't tremble. That's how I knew something fundamental had changed. I sat down in one of those hard plastic chairs, the kind designed to discourage comfort, and stared straight ahead at a blank wall. No art, no posters, just institutional beige. I wasn't dissociating, I was focusing. I needed 10 minutes, not to cry, not to scream, not to collapse. I needed time to bury my son, not the man he was now. The boy he used to be. The Sterling who ran barefoot through the yard and came home with dirt under his nails, and dandelions clutched proudly in his fist like treasure. The Sterling who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because he swore the thunder was angry at him. The Sterling who promised, hand on his heart, that he would always protect his family, that he'd be better, that he'd never be like the men who disappeared when things got hard. That version of him was dead, and I don't mourn the dead twice. Something settled inside me as that truth took hold, not relief, not peace, but certainty. The kind that locks into place and refuses to move. This wasn't about punishment. This wasn't revenge. This was about reality finally catching up to someone who had spent too long outrunning it. I thought about the ICU door. About Vada's hand in mine, too hot, too light. About the neighbors who cared more than her own husband. And I realized something important. If I protected him now, I wouldn't just be lying to the police. I'd be lying to myself. I'd be telling the world and Vada that this behavior was survivable, that it had no cost. That abandonment came with a safety net woven by a mother who refused to let go. I sat there until my breathing evened out, until my thoughts stopped racing and lined up neatly, one behind the other. This wasn't impulse. This was resolve. When I stood up, my body felt steady, heavier maybe, but grounded. Like I had finally put something down that I'd been carrying for far too long. The scariest decisions aren't made in anger, they're made in silence. The scariest thing I've ever done, I did without raising my voice. No shaking hands. No dramatic pause, just a decision. I reached into my bag and took out my phone. It felt heavier than usual, like it understood what it was about to be used for. I stared at the screen for a moment, not hesitating, just acknowledging that once I crossed this line, there was no stepping back. I dialed. The ring was short. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, neutral, trained to absorb chaos without flinching. I want to report a stolen vehicle, I said evenly. There was a pause, the kind that lasts just long enough for someone to recalibrate. I'm sorry, ma'am, can you repeat that? I want to report a stolen vehicle, I said again, same tone, same volume. It was taken without authorization. Her keyboard started clicking. Okay, can you describe the vehicle? And I did. Make, model, year, color, midnight blue, glossy finish, custom rims, no scratches, no dents. I knew every inch of that car because I'd signed the check that put it on the road. Then the license plate number. I recited it without missing a digit. Do you know the current location of the vehicle? She asked. Yes, I replied. I just saw it heading toward downtown. High speed, loud music, driving erratically. Another pause, a different kind this time. Ma'am, do you know who may be driving the vehicle? I closed my eyes, not in pain, not in doubt, just long enough to separate memory from fact. No, I said, and for the first time in my life, that answer felt true. She continued, professional but sharper now. Do you believe the driver may be intoxicated? Yes, I said immediately. There are passengers. The driver was reckless. Speeding, I'm concerned for public safety. Public safety, that phrase mattered because this wasn't about vengeance. This wasn't about anger. This was about accountability entering the room. I'm dispatching units now, she said. Please remain available in case officers need to contact you. Of course, I replied, and just like that, it was done. I ended the call and placed the phone back in my bag carefully, like it was something fragile. My hand was steady. My breathing calm, no regret, no hesitation, no second guessing, because the car was never the issue. It wasn't about the leather seats or the engine or the price tag, it was about the lie. The casual, confident lie sent from a moving vehicle filled with laughter while his wife lay unconscious and alone. It was about entitlement, the belief that consequences were optional. That someone else, me, would always absorb the impact. I thought about how many times I had stepped in before, paid for mistakes, smoothed things over, explained his behavior in kinder terms than it deserved. He's just young, he's stressed, he didn't mean it. But intent doesn't erase damage, and love doesn't mean immunity. I sat there in the hospital lobby, watching people pass by, utterly unaware that a line had just been crossed, not by my son, but by me. Because for the first time, I hadn't protected him from himself. I had stepped aside, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next would not be my fault. 20 minutes can feel like a lifetime when you're waiting for consequences to catch up. I didn't pace, didn't fidget, didn't check the clock every 5 seconds. I sat exactly where I was, hands folded in my lap, staring at nothing in particular. Around me, the hospital continued its quiet routine, volunteers refilling pamphlet racks, a janitor pushing a mop cart, a couple whispering urgently near the elevators. No one knew what I had just done. And that was the strangest part. My phone rang, unknown number. The vibration buzzed against my leg, sharp and insistent. I reached for it without urgency and answered. Hello, this is Officer Bradshaw, a firm male voice said, calm. Controlled official, we've detained a vehicle matching the description you provided. My heartbeat didn't change. The driver claims he's your son. In the background, faint but unmistakable, I heard shouting. Sterling's voice, high, panicked. Angry in that way people get when they've finally run out of charm. Call her, that's my mom, she'll fix this, she always does. The words hit me harder than anything else had. She'll fix this, not I made a mistake, not please help me. Just certainty, the officer continued. There are 2 passengers in the vehicle. We're assessing possible intoxication and reckless driving. If you can confirm his identity and consent, we may be able to release him with a citation. Release him. Like this was a misunderstanding, like this was minor. I stood up slowly and walked toward the glass wall that separated the lobby from the ICU wing. Through the corridor, I could see nurses moving quietly. I knew exactly which door led to Vada's room, the room where she lay unconscious, dehydrated, malnourished, abandoned. I thought about the neighbors who called 911 when Sterling didn't, about the unopened medication. About the text message lying effortlessly. I brought the phone back to my ear. Officer, I said evenly, my son Sterling is currently inside this hospital. The officer paused, papers rustled on his end. He's sitting beside his critically ill wife, I continued. He hasn't left her side. Silence, not confusion, calculation. So, Officer Bradshaw said slowly, the individual we have in custody is lying. Yes, I replied. I don't know who that man is. The words landed solidly without tremor or apology. Another pause. "I understand, ma'am," the officer said at last. "We'll proceed accordingly." I could hear Sterling in the background now, his voice sharper, more desperate. "What do you mean proceed? Put my mom back on. She's confused, she's old." The officer cut him off. "Sir, you need to calm down." I ended the call. No dramatic flourish. No shaking fingers, just a clean tap of the screen. And just like that, the law stood between me and my child. I didn't feel triumph, I felt relief. Because for the first time in his adult life, Sterling was standing alone in front of his own choices, without my money, my influence, or my silence cushioning the fall. I sat back down in the plastic chair and exhaled slowly. Outside, somewhere downtown, the city would keep moving. Inside a holding cell, my son would finally sit still long enough to feel fear. And behind one closed ICU door, a woman who had been forgotten was no longer alone. I didn't know what would happen next. Charges, consequences, reckonings. But I knew this: love does not mean protection from justice. And sometimes the most powerful thing a parent can do is step out of the way. When you stop acting like a mother and start acting like an adult, things move fast. There's a moment quiet, almost invisible, when emotion stops leading and logic takes the wheel. When love stops negotiating and responsibility takes over. That's where I was standing now. I didn't go home. I didn't sleep. There was no point. Sleep is for people who still need time to process what they feel. I was past that. Whatever grief I had was already sealed off, labeled, and stored somewhere I could deal with later or never. I sat in the hospital lobby until the night staff rotated in, watched nurses switch shifts, watched the city outside the glass walls turn darker, then pale again as dawn crept in. Vada was still alive. That was enough. I pulled my phone from my bag and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years. Odora, my lawyer, my friend. The woman who never asked unnecessary questions, especially when my voice went flat and cold. She picked up on the second ring. "Oilia," she said, "you're in town?" "Yes," I replied. "And I need paperwork drafted tonight." There was no disbelief in her voice, no teasing, just a pause, the kind that means she was already opening a mental file. "What kind of paperwork?" she asked. "The kind that ends lives," I said, "not literally, legally." She didn't laugh. "What happened?" she asked instead. "Worse than betrayal," I said. "I need a deed of gift for the condo." Another pause. "To Sterling?" she asked carefully, like she already knew the answer and was giving me one last chance to correct it. "No," I let the words settle. "To Vada." Silence, not the awkward kind, the dangerous kind. "Oilia," Odora said slowly, "that property is worth a fortune." "I know. And Sterling?" she pressed. I didn't raise my voice, didn't dramatize. "Sterling forfeited everything the moment he left his wife to die." Odora exhaled slowly. I could picture her leaning back in her chair, glasses slipping down her nose, the gears in her mind already turning. "Come to my office at 8, she said finally. "I'll have it ready." I ended the call and stared at my phone for a long moment. That was it. No tears, no speeches, no moral debate. This wasn't emotional anymore. This was final. People misunderstand power. They think it looks like shouting or threats or revenge. It doesn't. Real power looks like paperwork prepared in advance. It looks like calm voices and irreversible decisions. By the time the sun rose fully, everything had shifted. Sterling still thought this was a misunderstanding, still believed I'd step in, still assumed he had time. He didn't, because when a mother stops hoping her child will change and starts protecting the innocent instead, there is no appeal. I thought I had already seen the worst of my son. I was wrong. There's a special kind of shock that comes not from pain, but from realization, the moment you understand that what you believed was rock bottom was only the surface. Odora didn't say anything at first. She had been quiet for too long, her eyes fixed on the computer screen as she scrolled through property records. Her jaw tightened slightly, a detail I would have missed if I didn't know her so well. Odora didn't react unless something was truly wrong. "There's something else," she said finally. Her voice wasn't dramatic, it was careful. She reached into a filing cabinet and pulled out a thin blue folder, not thick, not heavy. The kind of folder that doesn't look dangerous until you open it. She slid it across the desk toward me. "A week ago," she said, "Sterling applied for a payday loan." I didn't move, I just looked at her. "How much?" I asked. "Enough to hurt," she replied, "and enough to spiral." My jaw tightened. Payday loans aren't for emergencies, they're for desperation. For people already sinking who decide to grab onto something that will drag them down faster. As collateral, Odora continued, he submitted documents related to the condo. My stomach dropped, slow and heavy. She opened the folder and turned it toward me. There it was, a copy of the deed, my deed. And at the bottom of the page, in familiar looping ink, was my signature, almost perfect. Almost. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto it instantly. "The tail on the O is wrong," I said. Odora nodded once. Forgery, the word hung between us. Not accusation, not speculation, fact. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from confirmation. Something inside me had already known. "He was planning to mortgage the apartment," Odora said quietly, If he defaulted and statistically, the lender would have come after the property. I said nothing. If the loan went unpaid, she continued, collection efforts would have targeted the listed owners. She looked up at me. You or Vada, the room felt colder. That's when everything snapped into focus. The power outages. The heat mysteriously off during winter. The empty fridge, the unopened medication, why her prescriptions weren't refilled, why grocery deliveries never came, why she kept insisting everything was fine while her body was shutting down. Sterling wasn't broke, he was gambling, borrowing against a future he had no intention of honoring, betting with money that wasn't his, with assets he didn't own. And when the pressure started mounting, when payments came due and panic set in, he didn't tighten his belt. He tightened it around someone else's neck. He was willing to let her freeze, I said slowly. Odra didn't correct me. He was willing to let her starve, I continued. To let her get sick. To let her go untreated. Because every dollar that went toward Vada's care was a dollar he couldn't lose. And that was the moment I stopped seeing his actions as neglect. This wasn't carelessness. This was strategy. I closed the folder carefully, my hands steady. Is the forgery provable? I asked. Yes, Odora said immediately. Easily, the signature discrepancy, the submission method, the timing. If this went to court, it won't, I said. She paused. Why not? Because I'm not interested in teaching him a lesson, I replied. I'm interested in removing his ability to do harm. I stood up slowly, the decision already formed. The condo goes to Vada, I said. Immediately, Odora nodded. Once registered, he can't touch it. Good, I said. I looked at the blue folder one last time. My son hadn't just betrayed his wife, he had weaponized my trust, and that was something I would never forgive. I didn't cry when I signed. That surprised me more than anything else. No shaking hands, no wavering breath, no second thoughts creeping in at the last moment. Odora placed the documents in front of me with the kind of care usually reserved for loaded weapons. The office was quiet, not tense, not emotional, just still. Morning light filtered through the blinds, cutting clean lines across the desk like boundaries that had finally been drawn. She slid a pen toward me. Last chance, she said softly. Not as a warning, as respect. I picked up the pen. It felt ordinary, lightweight, cheap even. Funny how life-altering decisions never come with dramatic instruments. Just ink and paper. I signed once. My name flowed easily, no hesitation, no flourish. Twice. Initialing where required, confirming intent. 3 times. Each stroke felt like cutting a cord I'd been holding far too long, mother to son, protector to reckless child, enabler to consequence. Odora reviewed the pages carefully, then nodded. Send it for registration immediately, I said. Electronic filing. She was already ahead of me. It'll be official within the hour. Good. That word carried more weight than I expected. Good, because within that hour, the condo Sterling believed was his safety net would legally belong to the woman he had abandoned. The walls he slept under, the roof he leveraged, the space he neglected, no longer his to exploit. I stood up, slipping my purse over my shoulder, already moving forward in my mind. One more thing, I said. Odora looked up. Go on. I pulled out my phone and dialed the car dealership. They answered faster than usual. Yes, Miss Vance, the manager said, suddenly formal, nervous. The midnight blue SUV, I said. It's currently at police impound. Yes, he replied quickly. We were notified. As the legal owner, I continued, I authorize immediate pickup. A pause. Papers shuffled. Where should we deliver it? He asked. To trade in, I replied without missing a beat. Sell it today, whatever you get. Another pause, longer this time. And the funds? He asked carefully. Donate them directly to City General's charity fund, I said, under Vada Jefferson's name. Silence, not confusion, understanding. Understood, he said quietly. I ended the call. No drama, no satisfaction smile. No rush of victory, just completion. Sterling was now officially homeless, carless, and broke. The condo was no longer his. The vehicle was gone. The financial illusion he'd been floating on had collapsed in a single morning. And the most important part, he still had no idea. Somewhere in a holding cell or police processing room, he was probably still rehearsing excuses, still convinced this was temporary, still believing I'd step in when things got uncomfortable. He didn't know the paperwork was already filed. He didn't know the money was already gone. He didn't know that for the first time in his life, there was no mother left to negotiate his consequences. I walked out of Odora's office into the daylight, feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing. You know that walk some men have, the one where their shoulders are squared, chin lifted just enough, like the world still owes them something, even after they've burned it to the ground. Even after they've taken everything they could and left wreckage behind. That's how Sterling came through the hospital doors, not broken, not ashamed, entitled. His designer shirt was wrinkled now, the fabric creased where arrogance had slept in a holding cell chair. Dark circles ringed his eyes, not from grief, not from worry, but from a night of consequences he wasn't prepared to face. Anger stitched itself into every step he took. He didn't scan the lobby for nurses. Didn't ask for directions, didn't look toward the ICU. He wasn't there for his wife, he was there for me. The second his eyes locked onto mine, something twisted across his face, the same look he used to get as a teenager when he thought punishment was unfair. Like I'd personally sabotaged his life instead of simply stepping out of the way. Finally, he snapped, loud enough that several heads turned. Do you have any idea what you just put me through? His voice echoed in the open space, sharp and demanding, like this was a customer service desk and I'd failed him. I didn't stand up, didn't rush to meet him, didn't apologize, didn't ask if he was okay. I slowly closed the book resting in my lap, folded the corner of the page with care, and placed it on the chair beside me. I gave him my full attention only after I was ready, then I looked up at him. You smell, I said calmly. Go wash yourself before you shout. The words landed like a slap. He froze. Not because they were cruel, but because they were unexpected, because they weren't defensive, because they didn't play the role he'd rehearsed in his head. For the first time since he walked in, he didn't know what to say. A few people nearby pretended not to listen while listening anyway. A nurse slowed her pace. A volunteer stopped folding pamphlets. Sterling's mouth opened, then closed. What? He said finally. You smell like alcohol and panic, I continued, still seated, still calm, and I won't have this conversation while you're in that condition. That was when it hit him. I wasn't afraid, I wasn't rattled, I wasn't pleading. The power dynamic had shifted, and he felt it. This is unbelievable, he muttered, dragging a hand through his hair. After everything I've been dealing with, you mean after everything you caused? I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. You didn't have to do what you did, he snapped. You went too far. I tilted my head slightly, studying him the way you study something unfamiliar, not with emotion, but with clarity. No, I said. I went exactly far enough. His chest rose and fell fast now. He looked around the lobby, aware of the audience, suddenly uncomfortable. This isn't the place, he said. We'll talk later. No, I replied. We won't. That stopped him again, because for the first time it occurred to him that he didn't get to dictate terms anymore. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You think you're in control right now? I met his eyes without flinching. I don't think, I said. I know. Something flickered there, fear maybe, or realization. The kind that creeps in when a person senses the ground shifting beneath them but doesn't yet understand how far the fall will be. He had walked in expecting a lecture. Instead, he had walked into a reckoning, and this was only the beginning. He came in angry. He stayed because he was terrified. Sterling leaned closer, lowering his voice like secrecy would somehow put him back in control. His jaw was tight, lips pressed thin, eyes darting just enough to betray him. You reported me, he hissed. You embarrassed me. You ruined my reputation. I nodded once. Correct. The simplicity of it threw him off. No defense. No explanation, just confirmation. You had no right, he snapped, his voice cracking despite his effort to sound dominant. That was my car. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. The car is gone, I said. He scoffed, a sharp laugh bursting out of him like a reflex. What do you mean gone? Sold, I replied. An hour ago. His smile twitched just slightly, like a glitch in a system that wasn't designed to process consequences. You're joking, he said. You can't do that. I already did. The color drained from his face slowly, not all at once. First his lips went pale, then the flush in his cheeks faded. His eyes searched mine desperately, hunting for the old tells, hesitation, guilt, softness. They weren't there. The money, I continued, went directly to the hospital. His brow furrowed. What hospital? I held his gaze. This one, I said. To save the woman you abandoned. He laughed again, louder this time, too loud. People nearby turned to stare. You're bluffing, he said quickly. This is just one of your scare tactics. I'm not. The word landed cleanly. He took a step back, not on purpose. His body did it for him. And the apartment? He demanded, panic sharpening his tone. I'm going home after this. No, I replied. He blinked. What? The condo doesn't belong to you anymore. The sentence seemed to float between us for a moment before sinking in. What do you mean? He asked slowly. It belongs to Vada, I said, legally. Signed this morning. The air left his lungs in a single broken breath. No, he whispered. No, you wouldn't do that. I did. His knees wobbled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself, suddenly aware of his own weight, his own vulnerability. You're lying, he said weakly. You can't just— I can, I interrupted. And I did. People were openly watching now. A nurse stood frozen near the elevators. A security guard glanced in our direction, alert. Sterling's mouth opened, then closed. His hands shook as he ran them through his hair again and again. You're trying to destroy me, he said. I studied him for a long moment. No, I replied. You did that yourself. I'm just not stopping it anymore. Something inside him finally cracked. The anger collapsed inward, folding into fear. Raw, unfiltered, the kind that strips a person down to who they really are. He looked around the lobby like a trapped animal, calculating exits that didn't exist. You don't understand, he whispered. You don't know what I'm dealing with. I know enough, I said. He swallowed hard. "This isn't over," he muttered, but there was no conviction left in it. I leaned back slightly, my voice calm, final. "It already is." And in that moment, Sterling realized the truth too late. There was nothing left to threaten me with. Grown men don't kneel unless they've lost everything. Not pride, not money, everything. Sterling's knees hit the hospital floor with a dull sound that cut through the low hum of the lobby. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't planned. His body simply gave out when his mind could no longer lie to itself. Right there, in public, under fluorescent lights that didn't care who he thought he was. He grabbed the hem of my coat with both hands like a child clinging to a lifeline, his fingers shaking so badly he could barely hold on. "Mama, please," he sobbed, voice breaking apart into something thin and desperate. "I messed up. I know I did. I'll fix it. I swear. Just help me one more time." People froze. A nurse stopped mid-step. A receptionist looked up, eyes wide. Someone whispered my name like this was a scene from a tragedy unfolding in real time. Sterling didn't care. The man who'd strutted through the doors minutes earlier, demanding, furious, entitled, was gone. What remained was panic stripped bare. "I have debts," he whispered urgently, pulling himself closer to me. "Bad ones, you don't understand, they're serious, they'll kill me." Kill me, there it was, not regret for Vada, not fear for her life. Fear for his own. I looked down at him, not with anger, not with triumph, with disappointment so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. "You created this," I said quietly. My voice didn't echo, didn't rise, it didn't need to. "I warned you," I continued. "I protected you. I paid for your mistakes until you mistook mercy for permission." He shook his head violently. "I didn't mean it to go this far. No one ever does," I replied. "That doesn't change the outcome." He clutched my coat tighter. "I'm your son," and for a split second, just one, something old stirred, a memory, a ghost of the child he used to be, then it passed. "And she was your wife," I said. The words landed harder than any shout ever could. He collapsed forward, forehead pressing against my knee, crying openly now. Loud, ugly, uncontained, security appeared at the end of the hall. Two men in dark uniforms moved with professional calm, eyes already assessing the situation. "Ma'am," one of them asked gently. I didn't look away from Sterling. "Take him out," I said calmly. No hesitation, no wavering. Sterling's head snapped up. "No, no, wait," he cried. "Mama, please don't do this, please." The guards each took an arm and lifted him to his feet. He fought them weakly, desperation replacing strength. "You can't leave me like this," he screamed as they dragged him backward. "You can't, I'm your son." His voice echoed down the hallway, raw and cracking. "Mama, mama," people stared. Some turned away, some watched with horrified fascination. I didn't answer, I didn't turn around, because the hardest lesson a parent can teach isn't discipline, it's finality. The doors closed behind him with a soft, mechanical click, and just like that, the noise stopped. I sat there for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle. My heart was steady, my hands still, then I stood. I walked past the security desk, past the elevators, down the familiar hallway toward the ICU, toward Vada. Toward the woman who had survived abandonment, toward the future I had chosen to protect. Behind me, a chapter ended, and I didn't look back. When a man loses everything, he doesn't run toward safety. He runs toward familiarity, toward the last place where he remembers feeling powerful, where the walls once answered to him, where he could still pretend nothing had really changed. Sterling didn't call a friend, didn't check into a hotel, didn't head to a bar to numb himself into forgetting. He ran to the condo, the one he still believed was his. The ride there was frantic. Every red light felt like an insult, every passing car like an obstacle deliberately placed in his way. His thoughts raced faster than traffic, calculating, bargaining, justifying. "I'll grab the TV. The laptop, the watch, anything I can flip fast." In his mind, this wasn't theft, it was survival. He parked crookedly, barely killed the engine, and bolted for the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator. Took the steps two at a time, breath sharp, chest burning, keys already clutched in his fist like proof of ownership. Third floor. The familiar smell of the hallway hit him, paint, cleaning chemicals, someone's leftover dinner. For a split second, comfort flickered, muscle memory took over. This was still his space, his ground. Then he saw the door, wide open, not inviting, not accidental, busy. The sound came first, drilling, metal biting into metal. Sterling slowed, heart slamming against his ribs now for a different reason. His steps faltered as he moved closer, the confidence bleeding out of him with every foot. Inside the condo, two workers were mid-task. One knelt at the doorframe, drilling out the lock with methodical precision, sparks jumping as the old cylinder gave way. The other stood inside the living room, mounting sensors and wiring into the wall, efficient, practiced, permanent. This wasn't a mistake, this was a takeover. Sterling stepped forward, mouth already opening to shout when he saw her, standing near the kitchen island, calm, still, my lawyer, Odora, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp, unmoved. Beside her stood two uniformed police officers, not aggressive, not rushed, just present. The kind of presence that says everything has already been decided. The condo didn't look like his anymore. The couch was covered in protective sheets. The hallway closet stood open, empty. The air itself felt different, like it had been reset, scrubbed of him. Sterling's mind struggled to catch up. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. He was supposed to get here first, grab what he could, regain leverage. Instead, he was late. For the first time in his life, the door hadn't waited for him. The workers didn't even look up, because to them, he was already irrelevant. "What the hell is going on?" Sterling yelled. His voice echoed down the hallway, sharp and panicked, cracking slightly at the edges. It wasn't anger anymore, not real anger. It was fear dressed up as outrage, trying desperately to reclaim ground that had already disappeared beneath his feet. The drilling stopped. The worker at the door straightened slowly, stepping aside as the ruined lock clattered to the floor. The other worker turned off his tool and glanced toward Odora for instruction, not Sterling. That alone should have told him everything. Odora didn't raise her voice, didn't rush, didn't look rattled. She turned toward him with the calm of someone who had been expecting this moment. "Mr. Vance," she said evenly, clipboard tucked against her arm, "you've been deregistered. This property no longer belongs to you." Sterling let out a harsh laugh. "That's illegal," he snapped. "I live here." One of the officers stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to be unmistakably present. "Not anymore," the officer said. Sterling's breath hitched. "You can't just take my home," he shouted. "My things are in there." Odora met his eyes without flinching. "The property is legally owned by Vada Jefferson as of this morning. All access privileges have been revoked." The words stacked on top of each other, heavy and final. Revoked. Owned. Legally. Sterling surged forward, trying to push past them, hand reaching toward the doorway like muscle memory alone could force it open. "Big mistake, sir," the officer warned, his hand resting casually but deliberately on his belt. "Do not enter." Sterling stopped short, chest heaving, eyes wild now. "You think you can just do this to me?" he shouted. "I'll sue." You won't," Odora said calmly, "and you can't." Her voice wasn't cruel, it was factual. He stared at her, searching for hesitation. There was none. That's when the panic really set in. His hands started shaking as he pulled out his phone, fingers slippery with sweat. He scrolled fast, jabbing at contacts like one of them might save him if he hit the right name hard enough. Call after call, straight to voicemail. Busy signal, no answer. He tried again, nothing. People he used to drink with, people who borrowed money from him, people who laughed loudest when he paid. Gone. Sterling's breathing grew shallow. He paced the hallway like a trapped animal, running a hand through his hair, muttering curses under his breath. "This is insane," he said, voice cracking. "This isn't how it's supposed to work." But it was. Because money attracts loyalty, and when the money disappears, so does the loyalty. The officer glanced at his partner, then back at Sterling. "Sir," he said firmly, "you need to calm down." Sterling spun on him. "I am calm." No one believed that. He turned back to Odora, desperation creeping into his tone. "This is temporary, right? Just until she wakes up, until things settle." Odora shook her head once. "No," she said. "This is permanent." The word landed like a slap. Permanent, not a punishment, not leverage, an ending. Sterling's shoulders slumped slightly, his anger finally cracking under the weight of reality. His gaze drifted back into the condo, to the walls, the furniture, the life he thought he owned. None of it answered him. For the first time, Sterling understood something he had avoided his entire life. There was no one left to save him. A man's life fits into 2 trash bags when he's lived it wrong. Sterling didn't understand that at first. He was still standing there, breathing hard, eyes darting between the officers, the workers, and Odora, like one of them might suddenly admit this was all a mistake. No one did. The worker emerged from the bedroom first, dragging 2 heavy black trash bags across the floor. They scraped softly against the tile, the sound far louder than it should have been. Another worker followed with a worn gym sack, zipper half broken, straps frayed. He dropped them at Sterling's feet. Thud, thud, thud. Odora glanced down at her clipboard. Clothes, shoes. "Toiletries," she said calmly, as if reading an inventory list. "Personal effects only." Sterling stared at the bags like they were foreign objects. "What about my laptop?" he demanded suddenly. "My phone chargers." "My electronics," Odora didn't look up. "Purchased in Vada Jefferson's name. They stay." His mouth opened, closed. "And the TV?" he tried again, voice cracking. "The sound system, also not yours," she replied. "Receipts confirm that." Each sentence stripped something else away. Sterling dropped to a crouch and ripped open one of the bags. Clothes spilled out, mismatched, wrinkled, shoved in without care. Designer labels tangled with cheap impulse buys. Nothing folded, nothing respected. This was it. Years of posturing, years of appearances, reduced to garbage bags. "You'll regret this," he hissed, looking up at Odora, then at the officers. "All of you." One officer stepped forward. "Sir, you need to leave the premises." Sterling laughed, a short, broken sound. "Where? You think I have somewhere to go?" No one answered, because the truth was obvious. He grabbed the bags, slung the gym sack over his shoulder, and staggered toward the stairwell. His curses echoed behind him, bouncing uselessly off walls that no longer belonged to him. Outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. The parking space was empty. Where his midnight blue SUV once sat, gleaming, powerful, his favorite symbol of success, there was nothing. No car, no shelter, no illusion left. Sterling stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, staring at the empty asphalt like it might explain itself. Then reality drove the point home. He dragged the bags down the block toward an ATM, shoulders slumped now, steps uneven. He shoved his gold card into the slot, the one tied to my account. The one he'd used without asking for years. The screen blinked, declined, card retained. The machine swallowed it whole. Sterling slapped the side of the ATM once weakly. Nothing happened. He slid down the brick wall beside it and sat there on the cold ground, trash bags piled around him like evidence. Broke, homeless, alone. For the first time in his life, there was no one left to blame and no one left to call. People think revenge is loud. They imagine shouting victories, dramatic confrontations, public humiliation. They expect an ending that echoes, but real endings don't shout, they exhale. 6 months passed. Not the kind of months that crawl by in agony, but the kind that slowly stitch the world back together while you're busy living. The city shifted into autumn, leaves turning gold and rust, air cooling just enough to remind you that survival doesn't always have to be a fight. Autumn settled like a deep breath after a long cry. The condo changed first, not in a dramatic way. No renovations worthy of a magazine spread, just quiet, deliberate care. The smoke smell disappeared. The stale alcohol ghost faded. Windows stayed open longer. Fresh air moved through rooms that had once been suffocating. Now it smelled like tea, like clean paint, like mornings that didn't begin with dread. Vada sat by the window most days, wrapped in a soft blanket, sunlight warming her shoulders. Her movements were slower now, careful, intentional, but no longer fragile. In her hand, a watercolor brush hovered just above the paper, deciding where to land. She painted flowers she said didn't exist yet. Her cheeks still carried the memory of illness, the faint hollowness that recovery leaves behind, but her eyes had changed. They were awake, not startled, not guarded, alive. "I got the job," she said one afternoon, not looking up from her work. Her voice was soft, steady, like she was testing the words to make sure they were real. "Rare books department," she continued. "Library restoration." I smiled, not the polite kind, not the proud kind people perform, the knowing kind. "I knew you would," I said. She finally looked at me then, eyes shining not with tears but with purpose. This wasn't survival anymore. This was direction. She didn't need saving. That was the hardest lesson for both of us. She didn't need rescuing, supervision, or constant checking. She needed space, ownership, a future that belonged entirely to her. She needed the chance to become herself again, without anyone draining the life out of her to fuel their own. And that was the real victory, not punishment, not ruin, recovery. We ate meals together in the evenings, nothing fancy, soup, bread, laughter that surprised us when it showed up. The condo felt different now, not because of what was removed, but because of what was allowed to grow. Peace isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself, it just stays. Sometimes I would catch Vada humming while she worked, a quiet tune without words. Sometimes she'd pause and look out the window, not with fear, but with curiosity. I watched her take up space again. And I realized something important. The story wasn't about what was taken from Sterling. It was about what was returned to Vada, her breath, her body, her future. And for the first time since all of this began, I slept without bracing myself for the next disaster. No phone calls in the night, no dread in the morning, just quiet. And quiet, I learned, is not emptiness. It's safety. I wasn't looking for him. That's the part people never believe. They think closure requires intention, that you have to seek someone out to finally face them. But life doesn't work that way. Life puts people back in your path when it wants to test whether you've truly moved on. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind you forget the moment it ends. I was walking down a side street, mind half occupied with errands, when the sound reached me first, the steady hiss of water, the slap of wet brushes against rubber. A car wash. I slowed without realizing why, and then I saw him. Bent shoulders beneath a soaked gray uniform. Sleeves rolled up too far, exposing hands raw and red from chemicals and cold water. His posture was wrong, not relaxed, not defiant, just tired in a way that settles into the bones. Sterling, scrubbing tires like they'd personally offended him. For a moment my brain refused to accept it. Not denial, recognition lag. The man in front of me didn't match the image I'd carried for years. There was no swagger. No expensive watch flashing in the sun. No careless confidence spilling out of him. Just labor, hard, repetitive, unforgiving. He straightened slightly, stretching his back, and that's when he looked up. Our eyes met across the street. Everything went still, no traffic noise, no water spray, no passing conversations. Just two people connected by blood and separated by choices. I didn't feel anger, that surprised me. I didn't feel hate either. What I felt was exhaustion, not mine. His. It was written into his face, etched deeper than wrinkles. The kind of exhaustion that comes from finally understanding that no one is coming to save you. He took a step toward the curb, water dripping from his sleeves, lips parting like he was about to speak. Maybe he wanted to say mom, maybe help, maybe sorry. I didn't wait to find out, not because I was cruel. Because I was finished, I didn't glare, didn't smile, didn't speed up or slow down. I looked through him the way you look through a stranger on a crowded sidewalk and kept walking. And something remarkable happened. The ground didn't shake. The sky didn't fall, my heart didn't race. Nothing dramatic followed, because some chapters don't deserve rereading. Some endings don't need words, and some people only become real once they're no longer the center of your story. I felt lighter with every step I took away from him, not because he was suffering, but because I no longer carried him. That was the true separation, not distance, release. My phone buzzed late that night, no name, no picture. Just an unfamiliar number lighting up the screen like a question I already knew the answer to. I didn't open it right away. I sat there for a moment, tea cooling beside me, the condo wrapped in the kind of silence that feels earned. Vado was asleep in the next room, breathing slow and steady, a sound that still felt like a miracle. The phone buzzed again. I looked. Ma, please, I'm starving. Even $10 would help. $10, that's all it takes to reopen hell. Not a fortune, not a house, not a car, just enough to test whether the door was truly closed or merely resting on its hinges. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was tempted, but because I understood the weight of what that message represented. $10 wasn't food, it was permission. Permission to step back into the role I had finally left. Permission for him to believe that no matter how far he fell, there would always be a soft landing waiting in the shape of my silence, my wallet, my guilt. I thought about all the times I'd sent money before. Groceries, gas, just this once. Each time telling myself it was love, each time convincing myself I was helping, but help that enables destruction isn't love, it's participation. I imagined sending the money. Imagined the relief it would bring him, not the kind that motivates change, but the kind that delays it. A temporary patch slapped over a wound that needed exposure to air. I imagined the next message. Then the next, because there is always a next. $10 today, 20 tomorrow, an apology next week, a crisis next month. I'd lived that cycle already. I wasn't going back. I didn't respond. I blocked the number, deleted the chat. And something remarkable happened. I felt free, not relieved, not victorious, free. Forgiveness doesn't mean self-destruction. Love doesn't mean funding abuse. And motherhood doesn't mean bleeding forever. Some people don't need another chance. They need consequences, real ones, the kind that don't arrive wrapped in cruelty but in silence, in boundaries, in the absence of rescue. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the city glowed softly, unaware of the final decision that had just been made. Inside, everything was calm. I thought about the road that had led here, the fear, the rage, the clarity, the loss. And I understood something I wish I'd learned sooner. You can love someone and still let them go. You can be kind without being complicit. You can choose peace without choosing cruelty. This wasn't revenge, it was self-respect. Microphone final words to the audience. So tell me, was Oilia wrong? Was she cruel to her only son? Or did she finally stop being an accomplice? Where do you draw the line between love and self-respect? Drop your city or state in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit you, support the channel so more real stories get told. And remember, sometimes cutting someone off is the only way to save what's still alive. With respect, until the next life story.